Let's take a look at how this system identifies these three federal labels. Again, this is not real data, but this is a sample high school that would have been identified as a comprehensive support and intervention school. You'll see that their index, they had 6% of the target towards adequate growth, 7% of the target towards proficiency, 86% of the target towards school quality, so on and so forth. It adds up to 30.28. 30.28 is the threshold for the bottom 5% of schools in the state in 2016-17. So if you have an index score that's close to 30%, you were close or you were identified as a comprehensive support school. If it's below 30%, you were either identified as a comprehensive support school or you were exempt because you were a center-based program or another school like Adjudicated Youth that is exempt from the federal labels. So comprehensive support is based on the overall index. Targeted support and additional targeted supports are based on subgroup performance. So in the tool that I showed you earlier, there's these tabs that run along the bottom. After EL participation, there is a subgroup report. The subgroup report is the best tab for you to see how close you are to being a targeted support school, or if you were chosen as a targeted support school. I think the department is working on fixing the Excel. This is a really dynamic Excel spreadsheet, but it does have a couple of minor things that are not working. For example, it is intended to flag which of your subgroups might be underperforming. If you have one or two subgroups underperforming, you are labeled a targeted support and improvement school. If you have three or more that are underperforming, you would be labeled an additional targeted support school. So for this sample school, again, this is all fake data, but for this sample school, they had two groups, and as you scroll down a little bit, it will give you this opportunity to click this box that disappears sometimes, but if you click on the subgroup, you'll see the box, and you can click this box and you can click Black or African American. It will show you the same overall index that we had for the entire school, except it runs the data for Black or African Americans only. So it only runs the subgroup data, and then it identifies their overall index, and again, if it's below 30.28, then this is an underperforming subgroup, and this is a targeted support school. So just to review, targeted support schools are those schools that have one or two subgroups performing at the level of a comprehensive support school, that 30.28%. Additional targeted is three or more subgroups. Comprehensive support schools, which replaces our priority schools, represent the bottom 5% of schools, and they have an overall index of 30.28 or lower. If they have a higher index, but they have not graduated at least 2/3 of their students for a high school, they would also be labeled a comprehensive support school. So let's take a look at a couple of the components within this comprehensive support and improvement school. In this video, we're going to focus on participation, and we're going to explain these two components here, and we're going to show you how these are calculated. So this is for any school, not just for a comprehensive support school. And in our next video, we will explore the proficiency tab. So what we see here under participation is we have 99.5% that met the target as a summative participation and 100% that met the EL participation. So by looking at the EL participation tab, we can click right here, or we can click down here on the Excel file. You'll see that for this school, 97 out of 100 students tested for English learners. That exceeds the 95% target So 100% met or exceeded the target. You'll see that same number appear on the summative participation tab. You'll see down here 97 out of 100 English learners in both ELA and math. It would report science and social studies as well, but just not room on the screen. And again, this is just fake data. So that translates to 100%. You'll see that groups that are 30 or more are also averaged to be calculated into the overall index value. And regardless if you have 30 or 300, they are going to receive equal weight on the right-hand side here. This doesn't seem too problematic with participation, but I'll show you where I have some concerns with this in proficiency on the second video. You'll also see numbers that are less than 30 or even less than 10. Any numbers that are less than 10 are the reason why these data are embargoed, and because they have not been suppressed. When this information goes public, it will not show this row if there are less than 10 students. If there are between 10 and 29 students, it will show the row, but it still will not be calculated off here to the right. If they are below the target, for example, I created this Hispanic group to be below the target, what happens is ELA met the target at 95%. Math did not meet the target. They were at 90%. But what we don't do is we don't take an average between the 100 and the 95 to get 97.5. We actually use a weighted average. So if more kids took the math test, that's going to have a greater weight on this average than ELA because fewer kids took ELA. So because more kids took math, and that's at a 95%, this is slightly lower at a 97.27. So we weight students by how many took the test, but when we do this overall weighting, we do not weight by the number of subgroups, which seems odd to me. So going back to the overview, you can see this 99.5 came from this 99.5, this summative index. It ends up on the overview tab at 99.5. It gets multiplied by the 2% of weight, and it comes out to be about 2. The 100% comes across, is multiplied by 1%, comes out to be 1. These are added together to become the school level index. Hopefully that gives you an overview of the 3 ESSA labels and how the index basically works as we dove a little bit into participation. One last comment about if you're not a high school with a large enough English learner progress, a more common weighting will look something like this. This is a typical elementary or middle school. This is a K-8 building, and they do not have a graduation rate, and they do not have enough English learners. So the 1% from here and these two 10%, that's 21%, get distributed equally among the remaining 4 components. So this goes from 34% to 43%, from 29% to almost 37%, from 14% up to 17%, so on and so forth. So this is a more typical weighting, and this is more of a typical view if you are not a high school. But that is an overview of the school index and a little bit about how participation was created and how it drives this summative participation score. In our next video, we will dive into the summative proficiency tab. I hope this was helpful.